So, to the topic at hand.
There it is.
The future of technology. This is a fantastic subject. And we're interested in the future of not just all technology, but technology that's relevant to the national security and intelligence domain, which is a very broad topic. And in order to address this broad topic of the future of technology, we've assembled an all-star cast of creators and people who have innovated for years and have showed demonstrated ability to field real cutting-edge technology. So let me start with an introduction to the panel. I am Bob Gourley. I'm a former intelligence professional with Navy Intelligence. I was a former Chief Technology Officer with Defense Intelligence Agency. And I've been in the consulting world for about 8 years now, working with high-tech firms and industry, and still tracking these many things of interest to the national security community. For the rest of the panel, I got to tell you, these are all stars, and I'll tell you, you can read their bios online. I want to tell you what I know about these individuals. Robert Ames, currently with VMware, their national security research group. Previously, he worked at In-Q-Tel, where I met him, and he was just really skilled at understanding what In-Q-Tel was doing and conveying that to government people who could make then decisions on which technologies to bring in. He has a great grasp of the technology that exists today and how it fits in modern enterprises. Next to him is Jain with Palantir. He was one of the first at Palantir, the CTO. He's the guy who creates, and he took Palantir on this 13-year journey now from initially bringing all the data together and making huge sense of it and really helping out from day one when they first started as an In-Q-Tel funded company to today being this open collaborative platform that allows people to collaborate over data and fields capabilities today rapidly. Next to him, Mike Lansdown, Chief Scientist with the S&T Directorate of Defense Intelligence Agency, where his role is to understand what technology can be applied to these critically important defense intelligence missions. A lot of them urgent demands from COCOMs engaged in fights who need some ability to collect something, or somewhat urgent demands from the human side of DIA for something to collect or to build or some other process, something that has to be brought in quickly. Teresa Shea, I think all of you must know Teresa. You probably know her background as leading the SIGINT organization at NSA and really helping to modernize that organization and move it forward. After she left NSA, she worked in industry. She worked, for one, at In-Q-Tel, where she was helping guide their decisions and what to invest in, and also helping these companies understand the intel community better and helping them better serve. She's also served on places like the Board of Directors of Recorded Future, which is another awesome capability. So, and today she's at Raytheon, where she's helping that great patriotic prime continue to focus on intelligence community missions. Now, you can read more about them in their bios, but I wanted to give you a gist for who we have on this panel, because I think these are the perfect people to tell us about what the future is going to bring. Now, let me just start with a little bit of context about why we want to talk about the future. In 1970, there was a book written that if you haven't read it, and you've certainly heard of it, is called Future Shock, by Alvin and Heidi Toffler. And the whole thesis of this book in 1970 by the Tofflers was future shock is a state that's going to be impacting people. They're just overwhelmed by continuous change and the dramatic improvements in the technologically enabled world. That book came out in 1970. It was very influential. And I think, frankly, they nailed it. It's a very shocking time, and we are all susceptible to future shock. But overall, I think thanks to people like this and thanks to people like you, the intelligence community has avoided future shock. We have been great at bringing new technology on, applying it to mission, and really getting big things done. Now, there's been a lot of frustration, of course, but overall, I'd give ourselves a very high grade at how well we bring technology in. The question is that always going to be the case? The pace of technological change is changing dramatically. All this stuff is increasing. Some of this stuff, it doubles in capability every year, from sensors to compute to communication to ability to encrypt, the ability to launch satellites that are incredibly capable. Is the intelligence community going to be able to keep up with this state of future shock? Can we avoid future shock is the question. And we have this and many other questions we want to dive into, but we wanted to start with asking each of our panelists for 3 to 4 minutes of their view of the future. What technologies may surprise us all in the next couple years, or any other thoughts on how the community can avoid future shock? We'll start with you, Robert.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for being here. It's a privilege. Oh, is it? I feel like I'm echoing. But,
all right.
I'm on the mic? Yeah. Little background on me, I used to be an opera singer, so if this doesn't work, I'll just bust out. So, first of all, it's a great privilege to be with you today and also this panel. And having been on a prep call with this panel, I'd really rather get to the debate and the conversation. So I'm going to be super brief. I think we stand on the precipice of even more velocity in the delivery and development of technology. And the sort of proof point that I want to look to for this, it was, to me, perfectly encapsulated by Thomas Friedman in his most recent book, which was called Thank You for Being Late. If you haven't read it, it is absolutely phenomenal. But he talks about this concept of a digital foundation, which was created sort of by a random confluence of events around 2007. And on top of this foundation, we have taken these massive strides forward, and technology has gone to a place where it's evolving faster than society's ability to even regulate it. And you look at things like Uber and Airbnb and all of these amazing sort of capabilities that have been delivered and see their impact, and you see this opportunity and the power. So what I really hope to look for in the next coming years is the intelligence community being ever more able to capture and the value of that data wherever it lies. And I'm talking a lot more about open source and things that are not necessarily unique, because there's a great deal of richness there. So I look forward to technologies in that space. The other thing that I really want to think about, and it's something, if I've been in your office or if you see me in the future, you'll hear me sort of pounding my fist on the table, is this concept of velocity. We are in a race, and we must figure out how to actually have meaningful velocity. And my view on that is lots of research and development in new security paradigms. In a software-defined world, as it really is today, I think there are new opportunities to think differently about security, and I really look forward to those technologies. I'll pass it down.
Great. Aki.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all the other co-panelists and to Bob for setting this up and INSA for hosting us. I mean, just to build on that point of velocity, I think that one of the things that sort of I reflect on when I think about the future is ultimately, how do we securely and safely maximize upside, right? Ultimately, from a mission perspective, that's what we're trying to do. And too often, I think we think about the risk mitigation piece of it and the downside mitigation piece of it, and we're not able to focus on that upside maximization piece, achieving the mission, the outcome. And so from a velocity perspective, I think that that's a really important piece. And at the same time, I think, sort of putting more of my commercial hat on and thinking about a lot of our business at Palantir is on the commercial side now. And when I look at that, there's this William Gibson quote, sort of, goes something like, the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. It's all over, it's just there's no consolidated view. And I think that when I think about that and the truth behind that, I think of that in terms of data, right? So the data is all here, it's just unevenly distributed. When I think about the national security sort of framework around it, or how it's accessible or folks are securely able to collaborate on it. And it turns out that problem exists on the commercial side 100%. Any large organization, any large set of missions that are sort of all trying to contribute to this one end, it's very similar. So I think of that quote, and I think about the data piece of it, and I think about how do you actually solve for that? And ultimately, I think the thing that you're going to see a lot over the next few years is, from a technology perspective, from a science and S&T perspective, how do we effectively meet our users where they are, so that we're not so worried about future shock, but instead can maximize the upside and give them, what we like to call the Iron Man suit. Let's build the Iron Man suit and let them be the humans they are and meet them where they are to enable them to do that maximal upside work. And that's sort of what I think a lot of us are going to move towards. And there's only a handful of Tony Starks, but everybody can feel like one. So
Awesome. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm the only Govy on the panel here, which puts me at a bit of a disadvantage. So what I do in our agency, I'm the chief scientist in our S&T Directorate. And so I have the job of going out, reaching out to private industry and trying to find these technical solutions to what we need. I think the setup from both of my panel colleagues over here is fantastic, because what we aim to do at the end of all of it, success for us is delivering amazing intelligence to our customers. Right, and I think the way you phrased it, Bob, the capturing the value of the data is what's important. When we talk about future shock, what I think we're most concerned about is whether or not we can do it in a timely fashion. Time is a premium now to crunch the data. We all agree that there's a lot of data. Our customers are not in a place where they can wait for us to crunch the data longer. So we spend a lot of time trying to come up with ways to either augment the analyst with some sort of machine learning, or to look for ways in which we can put a little bit more burden on machines, a little bit more burden on great visualization techniques. That's the data side of it. At the other extreme part of it is what we do in our directorate is technical collection. And so the need for widgets, the need for incremental, or is what I call evolutionary improvements to the sensors that we have, the power sources that we need, that's not going to go away. And so while data is really important, and all of us are in the business of data these days, how we get it is still a very important component to what DIA's mission set is. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Teresa.
Okay, we think it just works. So Bob, also I would like to thank you for allowing me to be part of this distinguished panel and at this great summit for the last couple of days. I wanted to start out by saying that it's not solely about technology. We have to think about the people, their passion, their ability to operate under a certain culture, create the environment that really motivates and empowers them to be able to develop and apply the technologies that we see around us every day. We have to be able to leverage what's being done in the private sector as well as within the government. And I really am feeling right now this need for speed, an ability to insert capability into the mission operational space much faster than our adversaries. Because let's face it, the playing field's not level here, and I'm proud to say that we're part of a democracy and we live under the rule of law and we abide by that rule of law, but quite frankly, the adversaries don't do that. And they do have an advantage when they can have access to every bit of data that's produced in their country and do as they will with that. On our side, we have to be faster at applying those technologies out front in the mission space and be able to constantly refresh that. And I think that's a critical aspect when you think about technology and when we talk about the data and we talk about the challenges that we have in front of us, that we think about not just technology solely, but we think about that in context of the people and their environment and the culture and the rules and the policies and the laws that they abide by.
Great. And now, do you guys see what I mean? This is the perfect panel to address the future of technology. There are creators and experienced professionals who've been there and are doing it still. And I have a few questions keyed up, but please keep yours coming. We would love more questions. First one I wanted to mention, 2 weeks ago, a lot of us were at the Big Dotas conference, and we heard from all of the IT professionals and CIOs in the community, and it was a CIO panel where almost to a person, the CIOs said, when it comes to cloud computing, they've now realized you don't just rush to put everything in the cloud automatically. Maybe that was a good first default. Now they stop and they think and they decide, does this capability work better in the cloud? Is it more financially viable in the cloud? Does it better serve the missions in the cloud? And so it seems like there's a maturing of the cloud approach in the Intel community that may actually, it's going to help us go faster. But hearing the CIOs talk about this stop and think before rushing to the cloud made me think, I would ask you guys a question. Have we reached peak cloud? Is there room for, how do we accelerate the use of cloud for mission? Are there things we can do to help cloud capabilities serve the whole community better? Thoughts on any of that, Robert?
Thanks, Bob. So I will jump in and say that I think the conversation of cloud has evolved over the past decade or so from the early days. And what I like to think about cloud is it's a paradigm, it's not a place, right? So often with cloud, we think of a specific instance or a specific thing that we've put out there. And we're thinking less about its interaction with the organization and the people and how you automate, sort of to what Teresa was talking about. And I think this has evolved in a really positive manner because there are choices out there now for what's optimal, whether it be price, whether it be performance, whether it be mission outcome, whatever it is. And so I think if we think of cloud as a paradigm and we use the concepts of scale, automation, industrialization, we're going to see tremendous benefit and a lot more, again, velocity and agility as we go forward.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, if I can jump in on this. So our CIO spoke at the conference that you talked about. And obviously, everything he said I completely agree with. But this idea that we rushed to the concept of a cloud and that everybody, a few years ago was like, the cloud, and we're all going to go there, right? It's going to be magical. But we do this on all of it, on all the technologies. I'm feeling it right now with AI and ML. We're all just full sprinting ahead into AI and ML. And I think that there's always this rebalancing that occurs when people actually get a chance to dig into it, have discussions about it, go to conferences like this, and you realize that it's much more nuanced and there's never actually been a silver bullet that solved all of our problems. And so I think the same rebalancing will occur with AI and ML.
That's a good point. I want to get back to AI and ML shortly. That's a very good point to talk about.
I was setting that up for you.
That's a good time. Aki, do you have views on this? Things we can do to better use the cloud?
No, I think what I would echo is that ultimately, I think these are all just hype cycles to a degree. I can say that when we look at how we operate as a company, both internally and as a managed service provider or software as a service provider, cloud has revolutionized our business, period, right? I could not move as fast or as efficiently for my commercial customer base, and frankly, for a lot of my government customer base, without the cloud, right? I don't have to go buy a bunch of servers from Dell, go find a data center that's probably out of heating, cooling, and power, wait 6 months and put something in there, right? I can actually go ship capability quickly. I think the trick with all this, because right now it's AIML, then it's going to be serverless, and then it's going to be who knows what. I just go to reInvent every year, and I see what people are talking about, and then within a year, I see it in every procurement, RFP, RFI that comes out. The reality of all these things is that when we forget that these are all means, these are means to the mission end that we are all here to serve, and we get too tied into did my program have cloud or this or that, I think that's when we sort of lose sight of the goal. And if we want to focus on upside max, we should be focusing on what is the problem we're trying to solve, what are all the tools in our tool chest that might apply or might not apply, and then how do we apply them effectively to drive that outcome as quickly, as cost effectively as possible. And I think that's just where the shift really should be.
Awesome. Teresa, any thoughts?
I think that, I just think that what you're hearing now from the CIOs, I don't think that's really, I think that's just an acknowledgement of what we've been doing. I mean, there's multiple clouds for different kinds of use cases that our mission needs require. And the virtualization of networks is very exciting, and it's inevitable, and we want them to take advantage of that. At the same time, they have security requirements, right? I mean, we want them to protect our national assets and national secrets, assuming there will be secrets in the future. That's going to be a constant challenge that we need to help with.
Cool. I have a lot of my own prepared questions now, but yours are starting to come in, and they're really great. So keep them coming. And a little guidance on that, make them hard ones, because these guys can handle it. They really can. And by the way, we coach them. It's okay to disagree with each other, and you may get a little argument and some drama if you ask a good question. So please keep the questions coming. I want to say, so far, most of the questions are dealing with things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms, how you protect your algorithms, how you protect your data. So I want to start with a general question before we get into some of these details, which is, artificial intelligence, what could go wrong? Because we are, like Mike said, really moving out on machine learning, augmenting intelligence with machines, artificial intelligence, and meanwhile we're seeing a lot of commercial things where there have been mistakes made and lessons learned commercially. We've seen AI that's fielded that has biases. For example, in 2016, Microsoft Tay was a chatbot that was corrupted and turned into a misogynist bigot through its corruption. The year later, 2017, there was an Amazon machine learning program that was fielded to review resumes for job applicants. That was corrupted and by itself corrupted itself to hate women. It became a misogynist and had to be shut down by Amazon. And and they are the masters at this. They realized the mistake as soon as they could, but it was too late. And there's example after example after example of commercially things going wrong. And now we throw into the world the fact that everybody knows the Intel community is using AI. Are there adversaries that will try to attack it and manipulate the data that feeds the AI and therefore manipulate the results or manipulate our algorithms? How do you know your algorithm's not been manipulated? How can you return to a known good state? You guys are the perfect ones to address that and would love your thoughts on any of that. Aki, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start on this. I think I have to be a little careful in what I say in this forum, but I think we all understand that adversarial AI is a thing. This is reasonably well documented. There's that, I forget if it was a Tesla thing or a Google thing with the stop sign, and you put like a little dot on it, and all of a sudden the car thinks, oh, it's not a stop sign. That's scary, right? And I think that this is something that is probably nascent in our understanding of it, and then the counter-adversarial piece of it, and then the counter-adversarial piece. It's sort of going to be a function of the art of war, if you will, in this way going forward. I think the biggest thing when I think about where artificial intelligence and machine learning are today, and I think about sort of how we've approached this from our perspective, sort of from early on, 2004, 2005. You have to start with thinking about this as an augmentation, right? How do I help the analyst do what they're trying to do, or the operator do what they're trying to do more effectively, more efficiently, and hopefully more accurately. And that's ultimately where I think we are right now. Let the machine do what it's really good at, sifting through lots of data really quickly. Let the human do what they're great at, is applying their intuition, helping guide the machine through sort of the space of possible things to explore, to find that right hypothesis to actually prove one way or the other. And I think that you are going to see artificial intelligence improve over time. I think the ultimate fear is, it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger with a massive machine gun, and turns out he's not human. But I think that's pretty far off. I think we should be very wary, keep humans in the loop, and make sure that we're ultimately looking out for both the adversarial and sort of other aspects of AI along the way.
Great, thanks. Other thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I know you want us to argue, but I'm actually in complete agreement. So I'll try to come up with something to argue about later. So for us in the Intel business, that we adhere to Tradecraft. That's why we have it, right? And I've never seen a tool ever implemented that replaced a human completely, right? This idea of augmenting what our analysts do, or augmenting what our collectors do, or augmenting actually all of the people across the entire TCPED spectrum, all of it is just to gain efficiencies, right? I think if you would have gone back years ago, people would point out that computers break down, so we should go back and use typewriters. Like, none of us want to go back to that, and we understand with a certain comfort level, and over time, you test things, you get used to seeing the same errors. Overall, it's always been a trust but verify approach to this, and that you sort of slowly adopt the technology, you look for places where those efficiencies can be gained, you test it through other means. I think it was earlier in the plenary, the NGA deputy director said, the nice thing about right now, where we all say there is so much data, is we have data we can analyze, and then we oftentimes have other data that we can then look if it's corroborative or refutes it. So I think that we have opportunities to implement these things without feeling like we're losing control in the long run of our analysis or of our delivery of our intelligence assessments to customers. Sorry, one more alibi. The big thing that I think we always run into is being able to defend these things to our customers and making them feel comfortable that we've thought through it, instead of just telling them to trust us. We need to give them the opportunity to ask the questions, like, have you guys thought through whether or not you can be faked? Have you thought through whether or not this is D&D? And we do that right now, because guess what? People have been trying to confuse the intelligence community for a long time, and we're used to looking for D&D.
Teresa, any
Yeah,
thoughts?
so I think we've seen both the intelligence community and the Department of Defense recognize the big movement in AI. They both stood up centers around this. DARPA set up a major effort to focus on AI. You're hearing more and more and more about it. For me right now, it's about the data, and about the data being resilient, about the data being able to be tagged, being able to be reliable, authentic, being able to be usable. I think we've got to be able to figure out how we can better share our data and our capability for resilient data amongst and between the government and the private sector, for example, so that we can apply that to our development efforts and our algorithms that we're developing. We're all going to develop algorithms. It's all going to, I think it's what ours is theirs and what's theirs is ours. It's ubiquitous, pretty ubiquitous technology, and it's often used in dual-edged, either for, both for offense and defense, but getting back to this ability to be able to actually share curated, resilient data is going to be a fundamental asset I think we need as a nation.
Great. Robert, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm going to be yes and, but that's great, because we kind of violently agreed earlier as well. What I'm going to say is one of the most compelling things that I've heard recently in the whole realm of artificial intelligence and ultimately engineering comes from my boss, and he's not here, so I'm not sucking up to him. But David Tennenhouse sort of pounded on his fist on the table and said, we need a return to good engineering. And engineering over time, software engineering, I've been out in the Valley a long time, and I think we've frankly gotten a little bit lazy about some of these things, and we succumb to the hype, and we put something that's not quite finished out there, and they are getting used to us as customers honing it over time. And this is, you could look at this as sort of maybe the slightly negative side of full-on Agile, right? But he really wants to talk about the principles of good engineering. And I bring that up in this community because I think this is a unique intersection of having smart people who have problems that you can't be wrong. And so you have a strong history of good engineering. And I'm really excited to see how that approach brings, combined with all of these sorts of things that that my panelists have talked about, better data, better tagging, and so on. I think you all can uniquely lead here, and I can't wait to see it.
Cool. One of the questions, somebody directed this at Aki, but I would like you to respond first, Aki, but any of you guys jump in, please. And it's about automated model building. And the question was, do you have any insights on the emerging market for automated model building, or auto ML, and extend that to, please, how does an enterprise manage their algorithms, and how does an enterprise allow people to collaborate over algorithms and protect algorithms from manipulation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So if I were to step back, and I think one of the interesting things that we were just talking to Admiral Sharp about was the notion of ultimately, like, sort of, again, the human in the loop, the Iron Man suit. And so in terms of when I think about automated ML, I'm not thinking about that runaway like algorithm that's writing other algorithms and sitting there and it's what was the fear we were just talking about? It's people are like, hey, what about my job, right? Like, what am I going to do if the algorithm's writing the algorithm? And in reality, I don't. From the work we've done, and at Palantir, we're not an artificial intelligence company. We do a lot of work in artificial intelligence, machine learning, but really what we're trying to do is enable data scientists and government and industry to be more effective at what they're doing. And in fact, what we're really trying to do is take subject matter experts who, they know their domain. They are the experts. They've sat on this thing for 15 years. They know every person, every sensor, every technique, whatever it is. How do I take that person and enable them to model? And this is where I think automated AML effectively becomes a thing. And so in the Palantir Foundry platform, which is part of our broader Gotham ecosystem, not to be confused with Cloud Foundry that VMware now owns, but what we do effectively is we do data integration to enable our customers to ultimately get access to that data asset, democratize access to it, and then we give them novel analytic tools just by doing the data integration that they can use to do modeling. So as a subject matter expert, I can look at a signal. I can say, hey, computer, I'd like you to train me a very quick model based on this signal over this time period that hits X, Y, and Z metrics that I know as a subject matter expert, and it'll build you a quick model. And then you can refine it, and you can train it. And when you have new data, you can effectively add it to the learning set. The person who's doing this work doesn't need to be a deep data scientist. In fact, usually what you see is data scientists creating the templates that folks doing this work are doing in the platform. But that's sort of the practical aspect of automated ML that we've seen and deployed very successfully, like both in the commercial and government sector, and sort of where I think the state of the real is today, not actually the state of the possible or the art of the possible, but certainly the state of the real today, and can effectively solve a number of problems.
Great. Anybody else want to push back on that? Would love an argument.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. No, I'm just kidding.
You gotta eat it.
Yeah, slap the table. No, I think a lot of what we need to happen is, so like, I think it's unlikely that our agency, DIA, is going to completely change the structure of our workforce. We're going to need folks that are data scientists, but we're also going to continue to need regional experts and technical experts. And I can't expect all of them to also know how to do their own algorithm development. So it isn't, in my mind, all that different than we all still have IT support, right, in all of our jobs, because some of us just don't know how to fix our computer. Now, you restart it first, that's what you do. But once you do that and you can't solve it, then you got to call somebody, right? Well, not all of us can be network experts or computer experts. And I feel on the data science side, it's going to be the same thing. And it should be that. And the quicker we get to where it's a usable program and it's less mysterious to the analysts, the quicker we can start implementing it and probably making a difference in their day-to-day work.
Well, if I could add two things there, because I very much agree. So we're trying to create a little drama for Bob here. No, I very much agree.
We're failing at that.
Yeah, I know. But I do think that there's two things there that are really important, maybe to think about in that vein, and sort of the opportunity, certainly for industry, I think, is how do we ensure that. So I'll use an example from NIH. We work with the bioinformaticians at NIH often, and the problem that we would often hear surfaced is, I do the same analysis for a different PI every day. And these are brilliant people, and you want them working on some of the hardest problems in the world. I mean, they're doing cancer research, right? This is the thing that's really critical. And so it's how do you break the data scientist out of the rote, sort of repeated thing, and give them tools that enable them to enable the subject matter experts, so data scientists can work on the truly advanced and novel things. That's sort of the first thing. And then the second thing is, how do you get people comfortable with the thing that comes out at the end? Because a black box, no analyst I've ever met sees a black box and says, oh yeah, I'm just going to take that answer for granted and go do something interesting with it. How do you create the transparency in what's coming out of it so that they can understand it, right? Because even if the data scientist hands off something, if ultimately the end user doesn't understand it and there can't be a transparency into where it's coming from, it's not going to be used. And so I think those are the two additional things I might add to that.
Hey, I want to switch a little bit and ask another question, maybe a series of questions, because somebody wrote a really great one here, and that is, how do you think our adversaries are susceptible to future shock? How are they going to deal with it? Who wrote that? That's a great question. And I think what I would love to hear your views are especially what you know of China. And we all read about what's going on there. They're very open about what they're doing. If you read books in the media, you're tracking this yourself, I'm sure. You don't have to have access to all the classified information. There's a lot going on there. And their future's about to change quickly also. My sense is that we are going to keep up and mitigate future shock faster than they are, but would love your views on that. Any thoughts?
So I guess I'll step in first and then blaze the trail for smarter people to talk on this. But I think there's no doubt that there's a lot of hype about what's available and going on in China. Certainly, Teresa alluded to earlier that their government doesn't have limits with regard to access to data, and you've heard some of these programs about your social score and so on. I believe, and I really do believe, anywhere there's still a lot of Band-Aids and chewing gum going on in some of these solutions, and those Band-Aids and chewing gum are often humans. Right, and they're sort of behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz, doing Mechanical Turk-like problems to go into this. And I think China can rely on that, right? They have a large workforce that can do that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be a limitation ultimately, because if they lean on that too far, then if better algorithmic development occurs elsewhere, they might get a future shock there. The second thing I think is, just look at what's going on in Hong Kong. Yes, it's not China, but the world is getting far more connected than it ever has before. And Teresa also alluded to earlier, it's not just technology, it's people at the end of the day. And I believe that there's going to be, and they can't stop the flood forever. And so I think there's going to be sort of a bi-directional flood, and just having a core set of internal innovation, I think, is still not a strength there. So that's just my thoughts there.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on that, Robert. I did mention earlier about the fact that I thought China had an advantage, given the fact that they do have so much data that they're able to curate and use to their advantage. However, that does not mean that they are better than us at innovation or ever will be better than us at innovation. I do think that it is about, at the end of the day, for innovation and producing intelligence, quite frankly, our creativity, our environment, our culture, all of that matters. And we have an advantage there. And we nurture that advantage, and we are responsible to make sure that we protect it for the future. I think it's really important.
All right, Mike.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. I won't speak to China specifically, but I think I think the short answer is that, yes, everybody is susceptible to future shock, right? What I think makes us a little bit different than some of our adversaries is what we talked about, or at least somebody alluded to, is sort of risk tolerance. Like our view is that, these are certain things that can't fail. And historically, if we just over-engineered solutions, then we were pretty sure that they weren't going to fail. We're getting into an environment now where we don't have the time to over-engineer things, or the technology moves so quickly that we can't build in so many redundancies. And so it's a little bit of unshaky ground for us, but I still think from a risk tolerance perspective, we place a premium on getting to the right answer and are less likely, even in an agile environment, to put out stuff that we don't feel is at least the 80% solution or 90% solution. I think where our adversaries sometimes look like they're gaining ground is their risk tolerance to put out stuff that's at a much lower readiness level, and then just run the risk of it not working or putting it together with duct tape and chewing gum, like you said. There are some benefits to that model, right? A lot of trial and error, and if you're just willing to suck it up and fail quite a bit, you might learn quite a bit in the process. I just don't think it's the sort of high quality approach that our government and our industrial partners have done over the years, and I don't foresee that changing.
Okay. Guys, I want to keep moving on this unless you have other. Well, a couple other questions came in talking about culture. And we also had an interesting discussion with Admiral Sharp just before coming in here that hit on culture. And so there's a lot of views on this, but I want to say, first, for a historical context, in 1791, the Whiskey Rebellion, President George Washington led American troops into the fields of Pennsylvania hunting for the Gourleys that were up there, finding new ways of bringing grain to market. And it was the low point of his popularity. People did not like that, and ever since then, there's been a huge distrust of the U.S. federal government, and I think some of that Whiskey Rebellion is in today's psyche. Our populace, by nature, doesn't trust the government, and so a couple questions here reflected that, and also it's part of our culture that that's a good thing to distrust your government sometimes. Some of the questions here refer to the fact that there are U.S. companies that are running away from national security work. Some of their employees are compelling them to do that, or some of them are trying to get their companies to do that, and then the company steps up and does the right thing and says, no, we do business with the government because this is our country. But it's interesting that dialogue is occurring. Now, I personally think that's just part of our culture. It's the back and forth. It's in some ways it's good, but part of me is a little disappointed, I have to say. And the questions that are coming in say you guys would love the panelists' views on that. What should we think about this when some companies pull away from business? What should we, and I guess take that from a national security context, what should the intelligence community and Department of Defense think about that? Robert?
Yeah, so I have faced this personally. Teresa and I were at InQtel, and we were going out to Silicon Valley, and it's a tough world out there right now, and there's a lot of concern and trepidation. But I have to tell you, at the end of the day, I'm heartened. It's difficult, and sometimes you have to have a longer conversation. And this is where I really encourage those of you who are engaged in the mission, get to know people individually whenever you get the opportunity, and sort of let them in on what you do, and let them feel and see your passion, and let them see how dedicated you are, because they will believe it. And I think there's it's very easy out there on again, the headline level to sort of point at this company and that company that's, because of some sort of employee survey determining not to get engaged with the government. But you know what? There's lots of people in that company. And I think this is about getting to know each other again. We've been here before. I'm old, but I'm not old enough to remember, the post-Vietnam era. But I think we can heal again, and I think there's lots of national programs that can do that. And so that's what I hope to see.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, it hits home the question, given, every Friday I've got a group of protesters outside our building in Palo Alto, and I'm deeply empathetic, right? There's some actual real issues. I mean, there are some amazing and crazy things I never thought I would saw happen in our country, and these folks feel passionately about those things, and they need a place to emphasize and exercise and speak to those things, and for whatever reason, our corner at Hamilton, Alma, and Palo Alto is a popular corner. Might be because we're there. But I think that actually when I talk to most of the people I know in the Valley, and Palantir was started with In-Q-Tel's funding, so from day one we've had stealthy CIA-funded startup in every article about the company. I have a lot of friends who even back then said, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you working with the government? And it really just it takes that engagement. There are a lot of great Americans in Silicon Valley that want to contribute to the mission. And finding people to work on the mission in Silicon Valley, it's a little bit of a tough time. One thing I may agree on, I think Silicon Valley is a massive bubble. I think it's very insular. It's becoming a monoculture. There's a number of things that I really worry about in Silicon Valley. But I think it's the reason why, you all and us as national security, presence needs to be in Silicon Valley. I think one of the best ways to get over future shock is to do what different folks are doing, set up institutions in Silicon Valley to meet the engineers where they are, educate them on the mission, educate them on the amazing opportunities and the challenges that we need their help to actually solve. Silicon Valley comes from defense, comes from intelligence. That's how Silicon Valley was established. People understand that. People want to contribute. But when there's 3,000 miles between the folks that are trying to deal with the problems and the folks that might have good solutions, and we're not sort of crossing that divide and meeting them where they are and actually spending time to educate them, it's not going to get better. So I would just encourage all of you to come. If you want to hang out in Palo Alto, feel free to come over, have lunch, go meet technologists, go over to Stanford, hang out with students, go up to Berkeley. They're even more fun. But really spend time with the folks out there, especially the young folks, to educate them on the importance of what you all are trying to do. It will pay very large dividends over time.
All right, Mike, Teresa, go ahead.
I just want to jump in here. I really should bite my tongue on this one. But going back to Bob's comment about our discussion with Admiral Sharp, what we were able to say to him was, sir, that's why you wear that uniform. Thank you for your service, because you're out there fighting the fight every day to ensure that those people have the right to say what they think, to express their views without punishment. And all of you in the audience here today, I want to believe are here because you too believe in that and you're dedicated to the mission. I get it, you got to make a profit, et cetera, but you're serving the mission. And so thank you for that.
Great. Mike?
I'm from the federal government, and I'm here to help. I am in violent agreement, again, that it really is about outreach. The intelligence community in general always has this mystique to it, right? And if you're not somebody that's worked in defense or with the intelligence community, it continues to have that because it's being represented by Hollywood largely and misrepresentations in the press. What I think in general, the only thing we can do is try to be as transparent as we can. Now, I get it. There's certain things that we do that we can't share all the details with the folks that have the technology that we want to employ. But to say we can't share anything, that we can't talk to them about what our overall goals are, to feel like you're forming a partnership, I think that goes a long way. So you brought up In-Q-Tel. I think In-Q-Tel is a really good model for that. Most of the agencies that participate in that find a way to get their requirements down to a level that's shareable with these small startup companies. We do at DIA a fair amount of outreach to academic institutions. We do a fair amount of outreach to small businesses, large businesses as well. Not always the folks that have clearances. I think finding a way to meet people, I think one of you two said, meet them where they are, starts to build that trust and gets rid of this mystique about the intelligence community being bad operators, but instead looking to protect the nation. So we're going on a charm offensive. That's what we need to do.
I just want very quickly a final sort of personal story on that. So my daughter was born a month after 9/11, and she's a senior in high school this year. And when I was engaged in a startup, I realized in talking to some of the folks, I just sort of assumed everybody sort of knew that pain of what it was like to be under attack in that day. And these people that are in professionals in the workforce, may have been 3 to 5 at that time. And you all have done an amazing job of keeping our country safe since then. And the reality is the wars are remote. So these people just don't have that context. And I think, again, this sort of echoing that, spending time with them.
All right. Guys, I have about 40 other questions on AI, ML, data, open data architectures, but a bunch of other neat questions on quantum computing, quantum encryption, other advanced technologies, and would love to get their thoughts on things like this too. One, for example, we all read about quantum computing. It's always been just a few years out, and now it's just always a few years out. But it's really, seriously, it's coming soon. One day, there's a lot of money being spent, not just by government, but by all the big industry players are investing in quantum computing. China is investing significant amounts in quantum computing. There will be a breakthrough one day, and it's proven by the mathematician Dr. Shor's algorithm, that once this quantum computer is there, everybody, the consensus is all asymmetric encryption is broken. All PKI, all the kind of modern e-commerce encryption is broken when a working quantum computer can run Shor's algorithm. Meanwhile, and I want your thoughts on this, but meanwhile, quantum encryption is here, and it's encryption based upon quantum effects, the ultimate randomness of the universe, building our encryption algorithms, unbreakable by quantum computers. And there's other quantum effects and quantum safe encryption that can be applied. And we need to be right now working to be quantum safe with our data. But I think what the panel can help us think through is, which of those two is going to win, quantum computing or quantum encryption? Robert, do you want to take that first?
I'll take a first step. So it is a public investment that I did at In-Q-Tel and D-Wave. I know there's a lot of controversy around that. It's adiabatic instead of gate-based quantum. But it was about getting our foot in the game and understanding. It was really about strategically engaging to understand what was there. And there really is some interesting stuff going on there. But what I think there is no doubt, I echo everything Bob said in the introduction. It's one of those things that's always been about 5 years out or 10 years out. I had the honor of participating in General Alexander's Enduring Security Framework about how does the U.S. create exascale. This was a few years ago. And one of the things that I think that was so important there is that we as a nation need to have a comprehensive investment program around getting to these ultimate realities. We can't have sort of competition amongst program managers and so on. So I really hope we do that. I also believe there's a lot of work that can be done today in sort of the realm of quantum resistant encryption and so on. And I think we should be working on that now. NIST is doing some great work there. VMware is actually participating in that and trying to really think, because we can't have a quantum computer one day and then say we're quantum resistant the next. We have to be thinking about that today.
Right. Other comments, questions, pushback?
I'm passing.
Okay, that's fair. Pass?
I feel like if I knew the answer to which one was going to win, I probably wouldn't share it. No, I think everything Bob said is a fantastic approach to it. I think in general, is that going to be the next big technology that we go full tilt at and go, like you said, following shortly thereafter, full tilt at quantum encryption? Yeah, possibly. But I mean, I think Aki said to begin, whatever the next buzzword is the next year, and then we'll overreact to it. And then, I think that it is very possible that those technologies will be a game changer. But I feel like we say that about all of them.
All right.
I might take a wait and see approach.
Okay. Well, I do want to ask you guys about all technologies. In fact, let me just start now. Augmented reality and virtual reality. Those are two related but different things. The virtual reality, you go into a virtual world in a headset. Augmented reality, it's laying data over what you see. Which of those is going to have the biggest impact in the national security space and in the intelligence community?
I'll start just by saying that at least we're trying to use both of them a lot in training, and that has paid dividends. So we have had opportunities to do augmented reality where we can create training scenarios for some of our folks. And then when we don't have what would be like a good model of something to augment, we can create that in virtual reality. I don't know that for what we do, I would put it much into the game changing. Is just this nice tool that makes training our folks a little bit more productive, feel more real in certain scenarios. The kind of stuff that I thought we would have been doing 20 years ago, I feel like we're starting to do a little bit more now. And I think that's just because that technology took a little bit longer to mature than I would have expected.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, from our experience, AR is certainly in the national security space going to be more compelling. The use cases, I mean, we can all brainstorm use cases that you could implement-ish today, but there are major problems. I mean, it goes back to data, it goes back to algorithms, it goes back to things like, how am I going to geo-rectify the things I'm seeing, right? It's one thing to do that in a room, it's another thing to do it in the wide open space in the middle of the desert. And so there are a lot of things that I think still need to be pushed, but AR would seem to be, from an operational perspective, not a training perspective, to be the place I would put my money. On the consumer side, it's all about VR, though. So I think it'll be interesting to see how industry responds to the national security mission versus the national security industrial mission versus the consumer mission.
Yeah, Bob, and I'm going to take the opportunity to push back on you a little bit here. That's really not an either-or, right? It's both. The national security community needs both, and they need to tailor the solution to whatever mission application they're trying to address, as Mike was saying.
Good. That's fair. That's fair. So let me move on. We got a couple of questions in about open source software versus closed and proprietary intellectual property protected software. And so I would love you guys' comments on that. In the context of national security, there's a lot of people, of course, going to open data architectures, open framework, open data sharing, and open source software is with us now and is critically important to how we function and operate. But also the proprietary stuff created by American industry is critically important. And how does the national security community find balance between those two? And what should be proprietary and what should be open source? And how can government decision makers know how to deal with this challenge? Any insights that can help people think through this here?
So I have a lot of experience in open source software, and I invested in a number of open source software companies on behalf of the government. And I think there's absolutely zero doubt that the open source movement, if you want to call it revolution, has absolutely had massive impact on everything from, you know, the very base operating systems that run the computers around the world to data and how we ingest and store and manage data to anything else. It's tremendously compelling. The velocity, I talked about velocity at the outset, the velocity of open source is simply unbelievable. With that said, I think there is a lot of work on behalf of the open source companies to develop their business models. And it's been a tremendously difficult space for them. Because people look at this as free capabilities, and we can take it and we can build our value around it, and then give no value to the company that is actually creating, managing the distribution, and supporting it. And I think that's been a real sort of, if I want to push back on the government a little, I think the government needs to give back more openly, and not just in terms of contributing to open source, but actually financially contributing to open source to keep it vibrant and to keep it, you know, sort of with a U.S. center of gravity. And so I think it's an interesting space. There is balance. I always talk to government leaders, a lot of people concerned about the security of open source, and I immediately say, yeah, but you can see it. So I think, you know, it's a very interesting space, and I think watch this space as the models evolve and as the companies mature.
But let me just, I mean, to make it real, let me say, why isn't VMware just giving its software to the government as open source? And I mean that, you know, across all software capabilities, there's a model of proprietary licensed software produced by a company that is created with, you know, it is their intellectual property and needs to be licensed and sold. Microsoft is created to do that, and we all use Microsoft, and we all love it, Microsoft. But, you know, there's that model, and it's extremely important to the American economy, and it's why we have the great software we do. But how do you know if you're going to pick an open source tool or a proprietary tool?
So I can speak from both my history at IBM and also now at VMware. So open source is tremendously powerful, and it's designed by committee and by community. And that gives you tremendous forward progress. But at the end of the day, as a software company, and I'm sure Aki's going to agree with me, you have to deliver a product, and you have to have an ownership and a sense of when you can deliver that thing. And open source is delivered incredibly quickly, but there comes a point when you actually have to have some sense of control and sort of something to stand behind. And I think that's where you see the still existence of proprietary software.
Well, And I think there's a slight, we can finally disagree on something.
Okay, good.
Not on the licensing piece now. So look, I think that there is a little bit of a fallacy here. I think there's maybe 3 different issues. So the first issue is a personnel issue, and I've talked to lots of CIOs and CDOs and CTOs around the government, and one of the challenges that they're facing, as whether it's a function of this push to the cloud or on the unclass side, a federal mandate on the civilian side to move everything to the cloud, and the awesome FedRAMP process, the thing that I'm hearing from them is, what about my workforce? So my workforce is not running data centers. They're not actually running networks in the same way. They're not necessarily sitting there worrying about a set of things that they had to worry about for the last 20 years, and that was sort of the wave of problems that they were responsible for. Now they're sitting there sort of twiddling knobs in AWS or in Azure or something like that, and they're fundamentally changing sort of what they do day in, day out. And there's a modernization education and sort of evolution that they're going through with their workforces. And as soon as they start to become proficient at that, the next thing they say is, well, oh, it turns out I can just grab this open source thing and run it in this VPC over here, and like we've got our data sitting over here, and we can do all sorts of great things. And I think that we want to encourage the technology workforce in the government to adapt those technologies. So not just the agile methodology, but the agile technologies, and to use them. I do think it's a fallacy, and I'd look forward to a couple of studies, there's already a few out there, that look at the actual total cost of ownership for the government for those open source based projects versus commercial technology that's here now that you can not spend 2 years to train your workforce and build, and that you can actually apply to the problem now to go solve the problem. Again, I come back to my opening remark. Our goal here is upside maximization towards that mission outcome. Everything else is a means. Right? As a technologist, the first thing I learned when I started, first time I went to In-Q-Tel and started looking at some problems and got told about fishes in water and all these other analogies, the only thing that matters is how you solve that mission problem, the outcome. So that first thing that I think people are really struggling with is what do I do with my technology workforce, right? Because these are great people that have served many missions over time. How do I evolve them? And I think we need to be direct about that. And when we're doing something to invest in our people, call it what it is. When we need a solution to a mission right now, call it what it is and buy the solution that's going to get you there. The second issue, I think, is this conflation of proprietary, which is like now a bad word. It used to be a thing that companies went around the valley saying, we've got proprietary technology, please use it. We're going to solve your problem with this technology. And now I feel like, proprietary has become this, like, if you say it, people shun you. I think I've literally told every company, never put the word proprietary anywhere. And the reason is that people conflate IP and technology and the value, the thing you're paying for, with their data. They think that because I have licensed software, my data is now locked up. And this is something Palantir's fought for a long time. And we call it an open data platform, the work we do now, just to make it very clear. Open doesn't mean open APIs. Open means open on the bottom and open on top. So on the bottom, that means your data is being written to an open data store, in Parquet or Avro or something that's an open data file format using open technologies, open source languages, things that people can be trained on, within the government workforce and contract workforce to actually be able to use. And they're open APIs. It sits in an ecosystem. None of us gets to hit restart and rebuild our entire ecosystem in 1 second. You actually have to integrate with an ecosystem and work there. So this is a conflation, I think, of proprietary and valuable technology that the government wants. And they want Silicon Valley and other areas to develop versus their data being proprietary. And anybody who's building technology where they're locking up your data, the government should never allow for that. And I say that as Palantir, right? Your data is not locked up in Palantir, but people think it is because they conflate the value add on top of that data with their data being locked up. So that's sort of the second issue. And the third issue, and sorry if I'm rambling, is I think at the end of the day, as long as we're focused on the mission outcome, there's going to be, sometimes it's open source, sometimes it's going to be commercial software, sometimes it's going to be a GOTS piece of software or something that is particularly unique and only the government can procure. Or only the government can really build or would build or should build. And we don't necessarily want commercial organizations building it and or open source technologies building it. And I think we just got to make sure that we're being really honest about which technology, which approach is the right approach for that particular mission. So that's sort of how I think about this question.
Cool, great. Mike, any comments on that?
I see what you're doing here, Bob. These are not either-or questions.
Yeah.
I know. The only thing I was going to add, Aki said there towards the end, is that at the end of the day, we just want to meet mission. So I think it's not either or. Like, I think what we want to do is provide the most amount of tools to get to the best and quickest, most robust solution. And I think in this case, there's not one size fits all.
Right. Teresa, thoughts,
Yeah,
comments?
the only thing, I think what Aki was saying about the proprietary markings, for example, it's all in the interpreter, right?
Exactly.
And there is a lack of understanding on what is the consistent interpretation across the board. So that's, I think, understandable.
Yep.
Guys, we're running short on time, so I want to ask a bunch of fast questions and then save a little bit of time for each of you to have a wrap-up. One thing that a lot of people have been asking about, and several cards dealing with something Teresa mentioned, which is culture. When I was the Chief Technology Officer at Defense Intelligence Agency, working with Lewis, I would tell people proudly that I like people and technology, just not in that order. But really, I know that people is what it's all about. It's really all about that mission impact, and that's people forward, making decisions, needing the right technology. And two of the questions we got here, one was about the current people, the technology that they have fielded that they may not be able to operate. How does the training keep up? And another was a more longer term, what will be needed in the skills in the near future for incoming professionals? How should the intelligence community transition to better train a more modern workforce to deal with new technologies? Thoughts on either of those? Training people today, training the future workforce.
So I think that I'll echo what a lot of folks have already said at this conference, right, is that we have a young, enthusiastic workforce, or at least at DIA. We've hired a lot of folks directly out of college. They are pro-technology. They want to implement technology. If anything, they get into the government and they're like, wow, I thought you guys would be a little bit further ahead. But so that part of the culture is right where it needs to be. They're enthusiastic. They want to adopt things. Some of the culture that we need to change is, I think, when we seek out technology, or we have in the past, it was often a thing. And so it was oftentimes a tactical solution. And going back to this culture thing, I think what we need to do is look at talent development as a strategic imperative. We need to actually change the culture of the mid to upper management folks to get out of the mindset of buying a solution and more into the mindset of buying suites of solutions and training our workforce and giving them the opportunities to play around with these.
Okay. Teresa, comments?
Yes, I think we need to think about the career, the government career differently. I mean, I had 35 years in the government, and it was an honor every day. But I do think we need to operate differently, where we have more rotation. Coming out to the private sector was quite an eye-opener, because they're in a tactical fight every day, and their heads down doing their tactical fight. But getting them out into private industry to take advantage of all the really where the money's being spent on technologies and the growth of technologies in the outside world, if you will. So having more rotation and being able to have government employees work in the private sector and then private sector employees work in the government, and having more of a rotational career than we've had in the past, I think that would go a long way. And figuring out how to do that with the security process and the security clearances, et cetera, would really go a long way for keeping people in the mission.
Great. Aki, thoughts on the future of our people, our workforce training?
No, I would just repeat something I've said earlier, which is like ultimately, like every analyst operator that I've had the good fortune to meet and work with and interview as we've developed solutions over, they want to solve the problem in front of them. They're hardworking, they're earnest, they care, they show up every day, they work their butts off for good reason, and that's to protect all of us, right? And so I think, from an education perspective, it's just about creating opportunities. I do think flexibility in terms of the government career tracks is, it's not an area I'm an expert on, but it's something I've heard as people often, they're like, so what's industry like? And if we want to keep the best and the brightest, you have to think about that incentive structure, and offering flexibility is one of the greatest things I think the government could do to both recruit and retain awesome people to continue to join the workforce.
All right. Robert, any thoughts?
I just want to get to other questions because I agree with everything.
All right, because we do have time for, I want to ask two more. First, about DOTA's conference again 2 weeks ago. It ended with a fantastic panel of J2s, these representatives of the combatant commanders and their intelligence needs. And they were asked a general question, what keeps you up at night? What are you afraid of? And Brigadier General Dimitri Henry, his response don't quote me on this because I don't get it 100% accurate, was very much the fact that, there's very little he fears, but he has some real concerns, including the fact that there's actions we should be taking today that we can take today, and that we may not be taking in 5 years from now. We come back and we're still talking about them. And I wanted to ask, in the context of the future of technology, if you guys could tell us, what action do we need to be taking today that you're afraid we're not working on, that we need to, or else we'll come back here next year and be talking about it on the same panel? So Robert, what should we be doing right now that we know we should be and we're not doing it?
So I alluded to it earlier in thinking of security in new and different ways in a truly software-defined world. I think it offers tremendous opportunity, and I would love, if I was president for a day or head of some DARPA or some other major research organization, I would love to see serious investment in thinking of security differently. We think about the way systems are deployed now. Sometimes they're only in existence for a microsecond or a couple seconds or maybe a minute. That's a different attack surface entirely than our traditionally deployed systems. How can we use that to create an exploit and do our mission in a much more agile way? In my mind, I look forward to a future, all due respect to the great work that's been done with C2S and all the other major cloud initiatives. I look forward to a future where the government figures out how to operate fully, comfortably, and securely in truly public clouds.
Awesome. Aki?
I would give a big +1. I mean, security frameworks and policies are the number one issue. As a potential solution to offer that I think we should be investing in, it's ephemeral computing. It's how do you make it such that any application can exist for on the order of a minute, but still do persistent work, large complex workloads. But ultimately, if that system is gone a minute later and it's replaced with home and continues the work, that's something where you drastically change effectively the ATP surface area. And so I'd massively +1 security frameworks and the policies around them and how we actually apply them.
Mike, what should we be doing?
So I alluded to this a little bit earlier, that I think that we're doing a good job of making evolutionary changes to the technologies that we're seeking out. I don't know what the right word is, but the revolutionary change in my mind starts to come with doing it in multiple venues. So I feel we do a good job of identify problem A, go out, find solution for problem A, but then we find out once we get that, all the other stuff surrounding problem A, we need to upgrade as well. So I don't know what the right word is, but I feel like we're not always seeking out technology solutions in a holistic, coherent fashion. We're doing it in sometimes too narrowly focused.
All right. Teresa?
I'm going back to speed. I think that we have learned how to make risk decisions in real time in the operational space. Just take the cyber operational space where you're persistently engaged and you're making decisions every day. Let's apply that to the capability insertion process and getting capability and technology into the mission faster. Let's stop doing the security accreditation process at the end of the line and then have to go way back to the beginning and start over. Instead, let's apply that machine learning, that automation at the back end.
Right. Hey, and I want to say, here is proof that the panel has changed the future. Here's proof. This is going to show up in AFCEA articles. It's going to show up on the INSO website. It's going to show up in the products that both of those organizations produce, white papers. It's going to show up on video on their website. It's going to show up in the stuff I write on my blog, CTO Vision. And I really think we have changed the future at least a little bit here. And with that, I say it's time to head to the plenary and thank the panel.
Thank you.